Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our first ever webinar. My name is Alex Rogers, and along with my colleague Amber Bloom, we are excited to be hosting a series of webinars throughout the year as educational opportunities for clinics, which will highlight best practices and give you a chance to learn from your peers and other clinics throughout the state. Today, we are happy to have our Reach Out and Read Wisconsin Medical Director, Dr. Dipesh Navsaria, presenting about how Reach Out and Read acts as a parental skill builder. A couple of notes before we get started. Everyone is muted right now on the webinar to help us avoid any sound issues. There will be time at the end for questions. Please feel free to use the chat function to write in questions as the webinar is happening, and we will help facilitate those questions at the end. We are also recording this webinar for future viewing and to share with those who weren't able to attend. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Dipesh.
Great. Thank you very much, Alex. I appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who's listening in. It's a delight to be able to take a few minutes to share some of this information. Reach Out and Read is generally thought of as a book giveaway program, right? People think about how we are giving books at checkups and how wonderful it is that we're encouraging reading and all. But it's always been clear to me that Reach Out and Read is not only those things, but it's also a way of intentionally working with parents. I tell people that it's secretly a parenting support program. And I'd like to share some ideas and thoughts about how it is that and how it really helps us build the capacity of parents to do the good job of parenting that they would like to do, that they want to do, and that they may just need a little help with. So let me start with kind of a big picture view. If we want to have productive, happy adults in our society, right, which I think we would probably agree that in a general sense, that's something that would help our society move forward, be more prosperous, happier together, and so on, is having those productive, happy adults. Okay, well, how do we get those productive, happy adults? Well, that comes from people who are educationally successful in their schooling. Well, how do we make sure that they are, through their youth and so on, becoming educationally successful? Well, you need brain circuitry that's primed for school success, that the brain is ready to be able to learn, to assimilate new information and ideas, and be able to put those things all together to really move forward in a number of ways. So how do you get that brain circuitry? Well, it's through early experiences that mold that brain to be ready for learning. If your early experiences are all about safety, looking for food, fear, all that type of stuff, then your brain is going to really be more in a survival type of mode rather than a brain that is ready to learn and take in what the world has to offer. So those early experiences are really critical. So how does that happen? The key number one thing is that children need to have nurturing, responsive interactions with the adults around them. When those nurturing, responsive interactions happen over and over and over again, those brains start to wire for love, for learning, for curiosity, for all those sorts of things. Okay, so how do we get those interactions to happen? Well, we need adults who have the ability to do that sort of thing. So we need to make sure they know how to do it and to feel confident that they're doing it well, because sometimes we all doubt ourselves. And we need to make sure that those adults have the capability and the capacity to interact well with children. A parent might actually know how to interact well with children, but if they're working 3 jobs and aren't home much because they're trying to make ends meet, that makes it challenging for them to be able to do all these things. So how do we get that? Here's where it all starts. It's through the programs we set up, the policies we enact, and the advice we give that directly influences those adults. So as you can imagine, right, it would be kind of silly if we sat there and looked at a 6-month-old and told them, you should be reading books all the time, right? That's not how we're going to get to these things. It's going to be through helping support their parents, help their parents feel good about what they're already doing, or perhaps redirecting them subtly in an even better route, and also reinforcing what they're doing and making them feel encouraged that they're doing it right. That sort of reinforcement and support through all these sorts of things ultimately sets in train this chain of events that I've just laid out for you that we hope results in a prosperous and better society overall. And that's really what's key. Now we can do this in a couple of ways. We can do this through intensive but small initiatives. Home visiting is a great example. And or we can do it through broader but scalable, larger initiatives. And I said and or on purpose because it's not that we need to pick one of these things. We should be doing them both. Intensive small initiatives are small because they're expensive. They take a lot of resources. Broader initiatives don't necessarily make huge, gigantic differences, but you can bring them to a lot of people. When you put these things together, then we end up with actually making some progress. So ultimately, it's things like Reach Out and Read that make a key difference. This act of sharing, of looking at a book together, of talking about the pictures, of being able to do this is not necessarily an automatic for many parents. They might think they know how to do it, or they might hesitatingly do it, but they might be discouraged when a young toddler, like the one in this photo, might push away that book because they have a short attention span. Maybe their parent needs a little advice saying, you know, it's okay if they only briefly look at a page. You don't need to read every word on it. Maybe you can talk about the pictures. Maybe you can point to the baby's nose and then point to your own child's nose and name it for them. All of these are acceptable ways of reading. This is something we call dialogic reading. It's a dialogue back and forth rather than just merely reading out loud. These are things that can be easily taught to a parent in the context of a trusting professional relationship. Here's another example of a parent, of a grandparent is my assumption here, although we don't know that, and how they're interacting with a younger child. This is a great way for people who are not who are involved in kids' lives, but may not know how to interact well with them. My own father-in-law was a wonderful man, but he sometimes didn't really know how to interact well with toddlers. Reading together was actually a source of delight for both him and my kids to be able to do together. So if you think about it, there's sort of a three-legged stool for developmental and health trajectories of children throughout their lives, all the way into and through adulthood. For one thing, there's the, oops, my slides seem to have stopped here for a moment. Give me one moment here. Okay. All right. There are the genetic, prenatal, and neurodevelopmental factors that go into all these things, the biological aspects. Those are important. We also know that the socioeconomic environment matters, that the zip code a child is born and brought up in matters just as much as those biological factors. And then you have attachment and relationship patterns. It's not just the broader socioeconomic environment, it's who's at home, who's in their early childhood center, who are the people interacting with that child. And that's really what's key and what we're trying to focus in on, that we should of course be addressing the others, but we need to realize that these individual relationships matter critically. We also know that the architecture of the developing brain is shaped by two things, genes and experiences. We can't alter the genes so much, that's probably the subject of another talk, but experiences matter. And you need to have both these things together. And I like to think of it as something that really matters in a number of ways. I'm sorry, my slides are freezing again. I'm just going to restart that here. Okay, there we go. It's like a campfire. You need wood and you need flame and a spark to get that flame going. So you need both genes and experiences. Excuse me there, we are, okay. And the active ingredient is the serve and return nature of children's engagement in relationships with those around them, right? So that back and forth, like in tennis, volleying that ball back and forth, that is the active ingredient that shapes the brain. It's not screens. Young children do not derive any benefit from screens, and we're seeing mounting evidence of that. What they need are people around them. As one of my colleagues once said, there is no app to replace your life. So we need to think and realize that development is driven by relationships, and that is the number one thing that we need to make sure that we are supporting as much as possible. So if you look at the developmental progress of children, you'll see a number of things that go on. And I apologize, my slides really are acting up for some unknown reason. Okay. You have the normal trajectory that we want kids to be on, the healthy trajectory that we want to see this progress from birth all the way to age 5. We have the high risk category. These are kids who, if we do nothing, that they will not do so well at all. And then you have the kids who fall into this middle category. We want to make sure that they are also being helped in whatever way possible, because they won't do so well if we do nothing. Adversity pushes down on all these curves. So what we need are good protective interventions to help make sure that children are shielded from the effects of that adversity. So what are these things? Well, for the healthy children, it's the things we should already be doing. Good anticipatory guidance, reading together, proper discipline, health services, early childhood, all those things together. We then know that, and again, I apologize, this is acting up in ways it hasn't before. We also know that for the at-risk kids, good parental responsiveness training, language stimulation, high quality early childhood education. And then for the highest risk kids, home visiting and specialized services will help push those curves back up to where they should be. So dialogic reading, as I mentioned earlier, is about showing parents how a conversation over the book is just as valuable as simply just reading out loud in a one-way type of format. And I already explained how important and critical that is. So we need to recognize that this reading to kids may not be a natural skill for adults. It may be something that they themselves have trouble with. Adult illiteracy is actually a significant problem in our society, and that reading may have been a problem and an issue for generations. But when it works, and it works well, as my colleague Perry Class says, reading is a triumph of the early brain. And I think that when reading happens and happens well, and children learn to enjoy it at a young age, it really is a triumph of what that early brain is capable of and what it can be molded into through the loving, nurturing interactions with parents and other caregivers around them. So I would also say that reading aloud is a triumph of the spirit as well, and really tells us so much about parenting, the role of parenting, and the role of nurturing in our society. This is some photos as examples. This is my wife reading to my son. He's a teenager now, so this is obviously some years ago. You can see they're playing a counting game, talking about what's in that photo, in that book. This is my sister-in-law with my kids, one of her kids, and a cousin, and they're all looking at books together as a shared family activity. And there's my father-in-law reading aloud to his grandson, again, talking through this book, and you can see my son there counting on his fingers. My son and daughter both looking at a book together. This was a gift he had just gotten. You can see the wrapping paper there. You can see how much they've already at this young age learned to enjoy and love books. And then this is my son one day reading aloud to his sister. He obviously couldn't read yet, but he was telling her the story. And then one day I found them both in a closet with backpacks filled with books, a stroller, and who knows what else, and they were having a reading camp out in that closet. So what do I tell parents? Well, a few things that I go through with them, which we'll have to restart here. Sorry, there we go. Read aloud together on a daily basis. Have a bedside lamp for your child and give them a little time to read just before turning out the lights at night. It can be as short as 5 minutes, that's okay. Limit screen time to less than an hour a day. And really for the youngest kids, there should really be no screen time. This is a whole different topic we can discuss at another time. No screens in bedrooms. This holds true even for teenagers. And again, I apologize. I'm getting this oddness here. I apologize for all that. Audiobooks are fine. There's nothing wrong with listening aloud to an audiobook. Visit your libraries because they matter critically. And have reading be fun and not a chore, right? I don't think it's a good idea to kind of make this a requirement before they can do something fun. Really trying to have reading be fun in and of itself right from the get-go is really important. So I always close with this photograph. Again, my wife, in this case, reading aloud to my son. I caught them in this beautiful moment years ago of being lost in a book together. And it reminds me of how much children are made readers in the laps of their parents, and that this interaction, this connection between parents and children is really the #1 thing that drives brain development together. And this photo, which also hangs in my office, just always reminds me of how critical and important that is, and how our efforts should really be focused on supporting parents to the greatest extent possible, no matter what. So with that, my public-facing social media links on Facebook and Twitter, as well as my email address. And with that, I would be happy to take any questions that there might be. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Navsaria, for sharing that great perspective on Reach Out and Read as a parent capacity builder. So we do have a few minutes open for questions. So if any of you do have questions, feel free to unmute yourself or use the chat function if you have any questions, and I'll read them aloud. So Dr. Navsaria, it does look like we have one question here. How do we support our families that don't have English as their first language to enjoy that time with books together, even if they don't have a book in their own language?
That is an excellent question. So Reach Out and Read does go to great lengths to make books available in the language of the home. And I want to highlight this, that this is really about books in the language that families are most comfortable with. This is not about teaching anyone English. Quite frankly, the children will pick up English very quickly the moment they enter preschool or kindergarten and be chattering away in English in no time. We want books to be available whenever possible in a language that the parent is comfortable in, so that they're able to have this experience of sharing books together. Nationally, there's about 24 different languages widely represented in Reach Out and Read, and locally, there are books that have been found in other less commonly available languages. In Wisconsin, we've even found some books that are in Hmong, in some of the Hmong dialects, which is really a delight. At some centers with very unusual languages, interpreters have actually sometimes taken it upon themselves to translate at least simple picture books, write out the translations on labels and paste it in the book so they could give it to particular families, which is obviously going above and beyond. If a book is not available in a language that a family uses, primarily, or if the parents are illiterate in any language, then there's a few solutions. One is you can use virtually any picture book, board book, etc., and just have them talk about the pictures. There are some wonderful wordless picture books by David Weisner, and there's a few by other authors, but he's probably one of the best known ones, where there's actually no words at all. Yet there's a rich story told exclusively through the pictures. So whether you go with one of those wordless books or whether you go with the English book and just let them talk about the pictures are there are as much a part of the story as the text is. And sometimes it can be fun to just simply try to figure out what's happening by looking at the picture and going back and forth through that. So I think there's a lot of different approaches that allow us to work with families that may be English language learners or not know English at all, or are illiterate, that still get at this deep, wonderful, nurturing connection.
Thank you, Dr. Navsaria. So that looks like that's all we have for questions. I just want to thank everyone listening for joining us today for our first webinar out of our Reach Out and Read Wisconsin webinar series. We hope to do a few more of these throughout the year with speakers on various topics related to Reach Out and Read. And with that, again, I'd just like to say thank you to Dr. Navsaria, and thank you all for joining us today.